And then if you want to start sharing your screen.
Yes, ma'am. Minimize and start. Cooking with fire.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is April Doherty, and I am the Program Coordinator at the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. APA is a private nonprofit located in Washington, D.C., serving prosecutors, their law enforcement, and community partners. Before we get started, I would like to draw your attention to our chat box, as well as our slideshow with some of our upcoming webinars and events. And I'm going to share a survey, if you guys would not mind completing it at the end of our webinar today. Thank you for joining this capital litigation webinar today. This project is supported by grant number 15PBJA22 GK03018 CAPL, awarded by the Bureau of Justice Assistance through the Office of Justice Programs. APA is very appreciative of their financial assistance and commitment to improving the justice system. This presentation's points of view or opinions are those of the presenter and do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the U.S. Department of Justice or the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. Just some quick housekeeping. If you have questions for the presenter, please use the Q&A widget at the top of your screen. We will hold questions until the end of the presentation, at which time our presenter will address them. If you are having any technical difficulties, such as audio or video issues or any other questions, please pop into the chat box. One of us will assist you with any sound or quality issues you may be encountering. This webinar is eligible for up to 1 hour of California CLE. Attendees are required to self-report. Please reach out to APA admin at apainc.org if you have any questions about this process. Finally, after the webinar, you will be asked to complete a 1-minute post-webinar survey so that we can continue to provide feedback with relevant and timely webinar trainings for you and your offices. Please provide us with feedback, as that helps us tremendously with future programming. We thank you in advance for your time. Jesse Evans is the Chief Prosecutor of the Cobb County District Attorney's Office in Metro Atlanta. He most recently and previously served as the Chief of Police for the city of Acworth, his hometown. He began his law enforcement career as a prosecutor in 2001. He has over 24 years of experience as a law enforcement professional. As a prosecutor, Chief Evans specializes in homicide and cold case investigations and prosecutions. He served as a Chief Assistant District Attorney for both the Cobb County District Attorney's Office and the Paulding County District Attorney's Office. He built and led the homicide and cold case unit for the Cobb County DA's office. Evans holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and Criminal Justice from Mercer University 1997 and Juris Doctorate degree from Mercer University School of Law 2000. He has served as a post-certified law enforcement instructor since 2016. Chief Evans graduated from the North Central Law Enforcement Academy as the top honor graduate student in 2022. He was thereafter appointed Chief of Police before accepting the appointment as Chief of the DA's office January 1st, 2025. Evans is a career prosecutor and a lifelong resident of Cobb County. I'm going to mute myself now and then hand it over to you.
All
Thank you.
right. Thank you so much, April. I appreciate it. So thank you for the kind introduction. As you all have heard, I am both a prosecutor, began prosecution in 2001. I've always been a prosecutor in law enforcement, and then most recently took up the mantle of police chief in my hometown for a couple of years before moving back to prosecution as the chief of the Cobb DA's office. These are just some things here that kind of was mentioned by April. So we're going to move rapid fire through this presentation. It's content rich. I will tell you in advance, don't worry if I'm moving really quickly through the slides. I've provided the PDF of these slides to April, primarily because some of the slides can be turned into search warrants, and it's almost like an appendix. So just know that if I move really quickly through them, these will all be available to everyone that's watching today. So topics, we're going to talk about leadership and prosecution. I think that's really important. Briefly, capital litigation, how to build a cold case unit, and then some advances in technology, which I think everybody is probably most interested in. So we're going to start off with a little bit of a leadership talk. There's I believe, a new trend working towards creating leadership for prosecution and for law enforcement. I think it's really important. There's a book that I tend to ascribe to, as does the Prosecuting Attorney Council of Georgia, called the Leadership Challenge, which has these 5 principles that we'll be coming back to throughout this presentation because they are directly applicable to how to run and manage a cold case unit. Our capital litigation component of this is to just remind everybody that obviously capital cases are different. Death penalty cases are very challenging. There's all kinds of issues that you have to think about, particularly when it comes to cold cases that might have a capital litigation component, such as statute of limitations for non-murder charges. Most states say there's no statute of limitations for murder. Georgia is one of those. But know that there might be some statute of limitation issues for other cases as well, as we'll talk about in an advanced search warrant portion of this talk today. The law that applies typically to cold cases when it comes to capital litigation cases is the law that was in place at the time of the commission of the offense. From a due process perspective. And I will tell you, this is fresh on my mind. We recently had a death penalty case, the sentencing phase reversed. Mr. DeMarcus Steers, a Georgia case example, where there were issues with his sentencing. And I'm now tasked with looking at that almost from a cold case perspective to say, how can we retry the sentencing portion? So we'll move on really quickly to building a cold case unit. And I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the first principles that's included in that Leadership Challenge book that I tend to ascribe to, which is to inspire a shared vision. The stats on cold cases are not very good. This is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. When cases go cold, very rarely do they produce an arrest. And of those, only 1% ended a conviction. This was several years ago. I'd be curious to see how these stats have changed as technology has gone up. A little personal history. My first cold case that I prosecuted was a case that occurred October 23rd of 1995. The young woman featured here, Carmen Smith, was murdered in her own home. It was a unique ligature strangulation case. Her son, then 5, was stabbed 18 times and miraculously lived from this ordeal. This is actually a crime scene photo. Miss Smith is actually in her bed in this particular picture. The offender was actually targeting one of her housemates who lived in a different portion of the house. And this is a case of displacement, if you're familiar with that term from the behavioral analysis unit. So our offender actually stayed in the house for a period of time after he killed Miss Carmen Smith. As I said, the cause of death was ligature strangulation. He waited for the child to come home, and he came home with the little girl of the person that he was actually basically tormenting, and stabbed this little boy 18 times, who again lived. Part of the investigation early on was ruling out others. Carmen Smith happened to be single. She had been in a tumultuous relationship, and there was a related prosecution for the offender that was basically stalking her housemate. He's ultimately the person that we believed did this. How did we solve this case? This is, I guess, again, my first successful cold case prosecution. Had to do with hair evidence that was collected in the 90s. During that time, we weren't doing a whole lot with DNA and hair evidence. And fortunately, this hair was preserved under some slides. Those slides were recovered, and we were able to extract DNA evidence to be able to say, hey, we've got a root of one hair that was found on the abdomen of the deceased victim. We can link that to our offender. This is him right here. So going back to the stats, we were able to defeat the stats and basically show that this was a possibility, that with the right vision and the right mission, we would be able to perhaps solve more of these cases. And so going back to the leadership challenge, when it comes to inspiring a shared vision, I knew that there were others out there that were interested in trying to solve cold cases. There are some cold case issues that you always have to deal with. Time is your adversary. You have loss of witnesses, loss of memory, loss of evidence. But don't let time get the best of you. You can absolutely solve these cases if you're committed to doing it. Big questions to ask: where to build your cold case team. We had tried to do it within one of our local police departments for a number of years unsuccessfully because they didn't have the right resources and politics kept getting in the way a little bit. So we decided we would start our cold case unit within the district attorney's office. We have 7 municipalities within Cobb County, Georgia, which is the northwest side of Metro Atlanta. And as well, we have a county police department and a county sheriff's office. And the idea was, hey, all of those cases are going to come to the DA's office anyway. Why don't we use our office to be the springboard for some success stories? We made a commitment that the police would take the warrant. It's always going to be their case, and then we would be the ones that would prosecute them for them. Of course, it's really important to enlist the support of your electeds. This is my elected district attorney. Recently came in January, Sonia Allen, and she's committed to our cold case project. It's kind of faded under the past administration. She's my 7th district attorney I've worked for, and we're, got some good ideas, and she's got a good head on her shoulders, and we'll see what the future holds for our cold case unit. So I want to talk about some case examples and some advanced search warrants. And one of the principles that I've talked about or briefly showed you on a slide was the idea that you got to lead by example or model the way. So one of the first cases that we worked with, I should say in the first 3 years of the cold case unit, we successfully solved and prosecuted 11 unsolved homicide cases, which was a sense of immense pride for our team. I want to talk to you about January 12th of 1991. We had an offender who killed a victim. She's blacked out in this crime scene photo. She was found by a lake. Her name was Yvonne Weems. She didn't have an ID on her. She probably was involved in prostitution. She had been beat up pretty badly. There was a sexual assault kit that was performed, and she had 2 gunshot wounds at close range. We believe she was shot in a vehicle with a fractured tooth. So this is Yvonne Weems. This was a body dump case. She was left by a local lake, and at the time, the offender was not in CODIS. So he eventually was in CODIS later, but that's after we had submitted the sex assault kits to try to find a match at that time. One of the big things, once we identified the offender, a guy named George Gingerelli living out of Florida, was my desire to get search warrants modern day to get onto his electronic devices. As you might imagine, there was some pushback from that for the idea of staleness. So we came up with some creative ways. Again, we're staying with the model the way kind of lead by example. Some of the things that I recommended to the detective was go ahead and call him out. You say, hey, look, this is a convicted sex offender who now is in CODIS because he's done another sex offense subsequent to our sex crime. We put where his address was. We called out him as being a sexual sadist, and that we know that they keep electronic devices. They use social media. They sometimes keep trophies as well. All of this search warrant will be available to you if you're interested in any of this. We know that he lived in multiple places, and in living in multiple places, you keep documentation about that. And then under Georgia law, we said that you have to prove statute of limitations for non-homicide offenses, and tolling language for statute of limitations would include any points in time where you are not regularly a resident within the state of Georgia. So by doing this, we were able to defeat the staleness issue by showing that he was a sexual sadist. He might keep trophies. He has a weapons affinity, and that we needed to allege and actually prove statute of limitations exception in our case. And the results of that was that we were able to get a search warrant and search his home modern day. Um, Mr. Gingerelli actually killed himself before trial at our local jail. But we did successfully at least bring some answers to the family members and navigate through the initial judicial process before we could get there. So this is all to say that there's absolutely cold cases that can be solved if you share values and you have the idea that you're going to work hard together. But it does require leadership and alignment. This is a game of chess, not checkers, when it comes to cold case solving, and it's definitely a team sport as well. Challenge the process is one of the points of emphasis in the leadership challenge book that I mentioned to you. And one of the things that I've always been fascinated with, my team and I, is genetics and DNA and how we can capitalize on that. So I want to talk to you about another case. There's about 7 case studies that we're going to be talking about today, time permitting. This one involves familial DNA. Mr. Lorenzo Williams had committed 3 rapes. We didn't know at the time that he was the offender, but we knew that the same perpetrator's profile was found at 3 different crime scenes. He was also a burglar. I happened to prosecute him for burglary very early on in my career before transitioning to the major crimes and homicide unit. He was arrested for peeping Tom back in the early 2000s, around the time of the 3 rapes, and that case was pending in a neighboring jurisdiction before he was sent to us to face his burglary charge. For an odd, weird way of the timing of things, his DNA never made it to CODIS before he was convicted for the burglary and the peeping Tom. And then eventually our office got some grant funding. Credit to the SAKI unit, is the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, and specifically Teresa Schiefer, senior ADA with our office. She worked with us at the cold case unit, and we worked with Parabon to say, hey, can we put these 3 profiles in there and try some familial DNA, similar to what we did with the Golden State Killer out in California, to see if we could generate any potential leads. Well, Parabon came back to us and they said, listen, we took the 3 profiles that matched the 3 rape scenes, we put them into this database. We run it up to like the 4th great grandfather of somebody related to Mr. Williams. We brought it back down the chain, and then they started doing their evaluation of how they could eliminate people. You know, there were 7 siblings. One was a female. Obviously, that's not her. One of them was too old. One of them was too young. He wasn't born at the time of the crimes. And then they began to narrow it down and said, well, here's this burglar guy, this guy that has a prior peeping Tom as well, that was prosecuted within your jurisdiction. We believe that he probably is your offender, which led to a search warrant to go find him in Arkansas to collect a known DNA sample. Sure enough, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations confirmed that he was indeed the same rapist in these unsolved 3 rapes. Sadly, before we could officially prosecute him for his crimes, he too committed suicide, knowing that we were on his trail. So this familial DNA really works. It's great stuff. If you have a multi-scene unsolved offender, we'd be happy to talk to you about the process of going through and trying to link those scenes together, and more importantly, to talk about how we can successfully prosecute these cases. The Parabon, by the way, is, back up for a second, just basically an investigative lead. You still have to go do the confirmation that the offender was the person that was the donor of the 3 samples from the crime scenes here, which is why we did the search warrant before we were able to actually arrest and prosecute Mr. Williams. So with that, we're going to transition to another case, one that is near and dear to my heart, involving facial recognition. Some of you are probably aware of how facial recognition technology works. Think about your cell phone, especially if you've got an iPhone, and pushing up on that iPhone, and it recognizes your face and it turns on. Well, that's facial recognition software. It's simplest, but it can also be used at a grander level. So in June 3rd, 2016, we had a case where an offender or offenders, definitely offenders, kidnapped a victim from the Atlanta area and drove him up to the northwest portion of Atlanta here in Cobb County, forced him to go to a bank account. Our victims here in actual ATM footage. You can see that he's got some bruising to his eyes and a pretty clear picture of the victim. We'll toggle through both of these, clear picture of one of the offenders behind him. This is one of those cases where, sadly, the offenders marched the victim out into the wood line after taking just $300, and they shot him in the back of the head. And we thought, well, hey, this is probably going to be a case that gets solved really quickly because we've got these great bolo photos that we can put out there from Bank of America's ATM. And you have this unique offender look with also a pretty unique T-shirt as well. We had hoped that this would always be solved relatively quickly with somebody calling in. So we put the bolo out and said, hey, if anyone knows anything, please call it in. I think there was even potentially a monetary award as well. Well, after a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, 3 months, next thing you know, 3 years have gone by. We had no viable links to our offender in this particular case, and we knew there were more involved based on some additional video surveillance. So I want to tell you a little story about Clearview facial recognition software and how this works and how we were successfully able to use this new technology to eventually solve this case and successfully prosecute it starting in 2019. I'm going to start by, again, talking a little bit about a leadership lesson. I think team meetings really matter. And anyone that's worked on my team, I should say, I hope that Nick O'Connor, investigator Nick O'Connor, is on this webinar today. He and I talked yesterday. He works in a neighboring jurisdiction. Give him a lot of credit for solving some of these cases. He is one of the best teammates that I've ever worked with, and you'll actually see a photo of him later on in one of these PowerPoint slides, I hope. We were committed to having team meetings. The whole goal of the meetings is not just to meet. It's understanding that we're in a war of chess, and we're not playing checkers. We're trying to catch bad guys and solve crimes and solve interesting problems. And sometimes creating collective knowledge is the best way to do that from a leadership perspective. So we did have a meeting around the time of the initial investigation. And as a team, we met. My victim advocate, assistant, my investigator, my partner, all of us met to talk about this case. Years later, after the case went unsolved, we had a friend visitor from the Attorney General's office named Alexis. She came in and we asked her, what are you doing at the Attorney General's office now? And she says, well, basically, I am trying to rescue sex trafficking victims by finding them as they're being pimped online and identifying them and seeing if we can give them services and kind of save them and bring them back to humanity. So that conversation was with this young lady, Alexis, and my then victim advocate, who had been a part of a meeting 3 years earlier where we talked about this case. And we said, well, that's interesting, Alexis. How do you do that? And Alexis says, well, I'm using this new technology called Clearview. It's a facial recognition technology that can take known images of the person you're looking for, scour public images on the internet. These are public, not private images. And then it can give you investigative leads of who the person you're looking for might be. So for her case, she was looking for sex trafficking victims. And that was a tool that she was actively using at the time in 2019, some 3 years after this murder was perpetrated. Me, of course, I'm not paying attention and playing on my phone like I usually am because I'm just a distracted person that sees shiny objects. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I should remember that and think about whether that might be of utility to me at some future date and see if our team could use it. And as I was about to walk away, my victim advocate, who had been part of that meeting 3 years prior, said, hey, Jesse, what about that unsolved murder with the ATM? What do you think about trying to use this software to try to solve that murder? And it was like lightning bolts struck me there. And my head exploded. I was like, oh my gosh, we have this unsolved homicide that wasn't even on my bandwidth, wasn't even on my radar. And my young victim advocate, Kristen, said, well, I think there's a chance that could be solved if we leverage the right technology. So we called the lead detective and said, please send us the best bolo you've got. And we talked about the team meeting that we had, and I'm going to show you how this team meeting paid off. So this is how the technology actually works. Yes, those are images of me. This is the detective and I who eventually went to do some presentations on cold case, and he wanted to show me how the technology worked. This is an app on his phone. It's the Clearview app. If you look at this photo on the slide in front of you, the circle on the lower left is a picture that he took of me at the Brasstown Valley Lodge bar, allegedly. Allegedly, we're getting ready for a presentation the next day. And then what it did is it searched the internet to see if it could find known images of me. And I can confirm those are some press conferences that I did. One's a Facebook photo that I remember putting up there. And then this is an interesting, funny one. We kept scrolling through the images to see, well, what's out there on me. And if you look at the upper right one, the one with me with my earbuds, I had never seen that photo of myself before, but I can confirm that that is me running a 5K. And I know that probably what happened is I ran by one of those sports photographers and he took my picture and uploaded online, and Clearview found that photo of me that I didn't even know had existed before, which is really interesting. By the way, for those concerned about my health there, it looks maybe like I'm struggling. That's actually the look of winning. So I hope I get a chuckle out of you, but that's what winning your age class looks like, age class being important. So this is generally how Clearview technology works, is you're able to take a known image to upload it to their technology, and their database will search for public images to give you investigative leads. So going back to our 2016 unsolved cold case, we took the two images that we cropped from the ATM, and after 3 years of inactivity, within 6 seconds, my investigator was able to find investigative leads. And there, sure enough, is our perpetrator, who was arrested the day after the murders after a car chase in Alabama, presumably fleeing from what he thought he was wanted for, which was murder, but we didn't even know the murders had occurred then. So that investigative lead eventually led to an arrest warrant. Our detectives went down to go find this young man in South Georgia with the Marshal Service. He was picked up by the Marshal Service. He was brought in to face the music, so to speak. At this point, lead detective Philip Stoddard had an arrest warrant for murder for this individual. He showed him the warrant, said, hey, we've got a warrant for you for this 2016 cold case. And the young man dropped his head and said, you know, I eventually knew that you all would be coming for me. He's now been convicted and is serving life in prison in Georgia because we used this next technology and because we didn't quit. So that's a great story about the importance of team meetings and the importance of creating collective knowledge. I think it's also a great story too about being able to think creative and to challenge the process. Listen, cases go cold because the normal methods, the normal methodology of trying to solve them have not worked. You've got to be able to think outside the box and think a little creatively when it comes to cold cases, because otherwise those cases are going to remain just that cold, unsolved, without victims knowing about it. I will say, going back to this 2016 case, one of the cool moments of my professional career was be able to call down to the deceased victim's family members and say, hey, you're about to hear on the news that we just solved your son's cold case. And when she said, the mom did, that, you know, I thought you all had forgotten about me, and I'm so pleased that you did not. It's one of those moments in a prosecutor and investigator's career where you can just say, you know what, that was a lot of work and a lot of effort, but man, I'm sure glad I surrounded myself with a team that's committed to the vision of solving these cases, because there are people out there that need answers, and we are sometimes the only ones that can give them to them. And so we'll transition to the next case. Got about 2 or 3 more involving geofence technology. If you haven't used geofence technology, it's pretty fascinating how it works. I will tell you that this is not without its controversy, and it is becoming more challenging to use. Google has kind of pushed back on it, but I'm going to tell you what it is. I put David Racy's name up there. He was the lead detective that worked with me on this this cold case and this particular search warrant that we tried to use to leverage and so some success. So our murder in this case occurred November of 2018. We had a specific crime scene location in Marietta, Georgia, again, northwest portion of the metro Atlanta area, Lori Joe Drive. Mitchell Jones was our deceased victim. Mr. Jones had been murdered in his own home. He was stabbed to death in a pretty brutal fashion. He managed to call 911 before his death, and looking into, so there's a protracted 911 call, about 12 minutes long. It's very hard to hear, very hard to listen to, and not a lot of clues as to how he was killed. He was so out of it that he couldn't even describe how he'd been assaulted, where he was, couldn't give us an address, couldn't do anything like that. So we had to GPS the phone that he had, and officers had to break down his bedroom door in order to get to him to try to give him aid. Unfortunately, he died from his injuries. There were a number of things that we had to take a look at to run down before we could try to eliminate potential suspects. He was homosexual. He was single. He had some prior relationships. He was a small-time drug dealer, weed. We did find some minor stolen property at his home as well. All of these things are potential leads for why somebody might have some animus towards Mr. Jones, and all of the things had to be run down. As I said, he reported the 911 that he was assaulted. This was clearly a prolonged physical altercation. He had multiple sharp force injuries and clusters. There was suspect blood found on a threshold of a door that did not belong to the deceased victim, but it also was not in CODIS. So this is yet another case in this PowerPoint where we didn't have CODIS hit. And the victim's primarily cell phone was stolen. He was calling from sort of like another burner kind of phone. And we did have some great video of a particular four-door vehicle from a neighbor's doorbell camera that we're looking from. Our crime scene was pretty put together, except for the bedroom. The bedroom was a very bloody scene, as you can see here. As I mentioned, this was a protracted, obviously very violent, up close and personal assault on the victim. But with few actionable leads, the case eventually went cold, and we had a blank slate. We had no particular leads here. So I'll give you some background about Geofence. A little bit after this, my cold case unit and I went up to Quantico, Virginia, to attend an International Homicide Investigator Association, IHIA. Great group to be a part of for anyone that's here. You just get a nomination from somebody that's already in the group and pay a nominal fee, and you're allowed to attend some pretty great trainings. One of the trainings that my cold case unit and I decided to go to was one up in Quantico with the behavioral analysis unit and the FBI CAST team. The CAST team are, as you probably know, the people that do the electronic stuff. And I was listening to them talking about this technology that they're now trying to leverage called this geofence technologies, this idea that you could look at an area of interest and say what users were in that area within this quote unquote geofence, this fake fence line, to see if you can identify any suspects. And in my mind, I was tucking it away saying, okay, again, this is a technology that someday may be of great future utility to us. Meanwhile, Detective Racy, who I mentioned before, was getting a similar technology update from the CAST people, I believe in Louisiana, and he realized that that might be a benefit to the Mitchell Jones case. So he reached out to me and he said, hey, listen, I think Google is actually collecting a lot of data, and I think we might be able to leverage some of this stuff for us. So we're going to watch a short video. This is a video with Tucker Carlson about technology and some of the things that Google is keeping. So we'll watch this video now, and then I'll come back to you in a minute.
Hey, Jesse, our audio isn't on.
It's not on. Okay, thank you very much. Let's see. I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute. Let me go to this. Share. Gonna turn that back on, and then I'm going to reshare this video. Thank you, April, for helping out with that. Let me see if I can share this video again, and let's try from the beginning. If this does not work, don't worry, people. We're just going to pivot and we'll go. Like, let's try again.
Last night, in an exclusive investigation, we showed you 2 patents that Google has filed for. They show the company's willingness to stick a camera in your bedroom and spy on you and your children, and then, of course, use that information to sell you things. That's how surveillance capitalism works. But currently, Google doesn't have a camera in every bedroom or every home. It does have a phone in millions of people's pockets, though. And the question is, how much information is Google getting from those phones? We put a couple of our smartest producers on this, and then we send Fox News headlines anchor Brett Larson out to investigate. Watch.
We know that Google is tracking us. We agree to it when we set up our phones. So we wanted to figure out what exactly Google is learning about us throughout the day. So here's what we're going to do. We have 2 identical phones. The only difference between these 2 phones is this one is in airplane mode. Both of the phones lack a SIM card, and they haven't been set up to access any Wi-Fi networks. So for all intents and purposes, these phones have no connection to a data network. We're going to keep them with us throughout the day. And while I travel around D.C., we're going to figure out just what Google is finding out about me.
Our first stop, Sim's convenience store, just outside our Fox bureau, for a quick coffee. From there, we took a walk to the Capitol and took a quick walk around the Senate office buildings, and then decided to hop in a car and head around town.
Hello. We're going to the Children's Hospital, please.
To run our test, we had to do more than walk the block, so we took a tour around our nation's capital. First, due north to the Children's National Medical Center Hospital, then west to St. Albans School and the National Cathedral. Our tour around town was a 14-mile journey that lasted more than an hour. The entire time, the phones had no access to the internet.
Oh my goodness.
Not a Wi-Fi connection and not any cellular data service. It almost seemed quaint to assume that Google wouldn't even be able to collect data on me.
Let's head back to the bureau, my friend. Oh, that church is beautiful.
Google's business model is simple. Collect data on its users and then use that data to sell targeted ads. It's a business model called surveillance capitalism. But does that critical data collection work even when your phones aren't connected?
So we're back here at our Fox Bureau in D.C., and we've got both of our phones exactly how we left with them. The only difference, really, I snapped a couple of bad selfies at the National Cathedral. But otherwise, they have stayed in my pocket for the entire day. So let's find out what they know. This is our man-in-the-middle device. It's basically a Wi-Fi network that these phones are going to connect to once we turn their Wi-Fi on. It's going to pass data through it on the way to Google. But on the way, we're actually going to get a copy of the same data that Google's going to get. We'll be able to decrypt it and then find out where we've been throughout the day.
Within minutes, the numbers rolled in. The phone that wasn't on airplane mode registered more than 100 locations, 130 activities, and even 152 barometric readings. As soon as it hooked up to our Wi-Fi, it transmitted 300 kilobytes of data straight to Google. The phone even logged our exact locations, tracking us all around town, the Capitol, the hospital, the school, and the cathedral.
Now, you may notice what's missing here is the exact route that we took, but it got that data too. It knows when I got out of the car.
The metadata has a time log down to the very second, tracking everything when they think that you're walking, riding, and yes, even getting out of the car.
Okay, so you're thinking, this isn't a big deal. I'll just put my phone in airplane mode. Yeah, we thought of that too. This is the other phone that we had with us that no SIM card also remained in airplane mode the entire time. Let's see what kind of data it captured.
The phone with airplane mode activated actually logged more locations and activities than the other phone, and it also transferred hundreds of kilobytes of data to Google as soon as it was activated.
The only thing that's missing from this map is our stop at the Children's Hospital, but it still knows we were there. There it is. Exiting vehicle, 100% accuracy,
Through complicated user agreements and free software, Google gets users to sign away their privacy for nothing. They're even following you in the places that most people would expect total privacy: government buildings, a children's hospital, a private school, a church. Every move you make, every step you take, Google is watching you.
Now, in a statement to Fox News, Google told us that users who want to opt out of tracking should turn off location history. But doing that is harder than you'd think, and most of Google's apps include hidden queries that automatically sign you up for the surveillance. For now, we will continue looking into how Silicon Valley sells your privacy. But until then, just remember, when you're using a free online service, you're probably not the customer. You're actually the product. Tucker?
Shocking.
Okay, so sorry for this technology disruption there for just a quick second, but that generally gives you the idea of what we're doing now. They did have, admittedly, the benefit of having the two handsets in this particular case to look at, but there's no reason to believe that the handsets are not sending the data to Google, which is what we sort of learned through our trainings with the CAST team of the FBI. So what is it? A geofence, as we talk about it. It's a virtual perimeter for a real world geographic area. It can be dynamically generated or predefined. Usually it's predefined. So I'll give you an example. There's a Jimmy John's sandwich shop that is up here near where I live. I happen to have the Jimmy John's app, and if I ever ride, I might also get my hair cut by the place with the Jimmy John's. And if I ever drive into this place to go get my hair cut, I automatically get an alert on my phone that says, hey, if there's a Jimmy John's near you, you should consider placing an order. Similarly, you might go to a mall and suddenly you get hit with an ad from whatever your anchor store is for that mall or whatever. That's geofence technology. It's a technology that's designed for saying your location aware device, your handset is near here. So we're going to push out stuff to you to say, we recognize that you're in the area because you've somehow connected to something, some router. And because of that, we're going to send you information that we can believe can be used from a marketing perspective. That's what it was intended for. The dynamically generated is a little bit different. So I'll give you the first example of me dealing with dynamically generated. We used to have a school bus stop near my house, and my kids, when they rode the school bus, they would sometimes the bus would send me a message saying, hey, you're close to your area. That's probably geofence technology, and the buses come in a predefined area, dynamically generated within, say less than a mile of my house, to let me know, hey, please give me an alert when the bus is almost here, so that I know that the kids are here. Similarly, you can get an alert when the buses come back home as well if you happen to be at work. So there's a lot on these next several slides, most of which were created by Detective Racy. So I'm going to skip through a lot of this because you all can use this for your search warrants if you choose to do a geofence search warrant. It is complicated to do. It's become more complicated since Google has found out what we in law enforcement are doing with it. It's not impossible to do. It just requires a little bit of labor. So as I said, geofence monitors labor-aware devices, which is basically any cell phone. It knows where the device is, and it can send messages or monitor devices as well. Here are some of the applications that it was designed for: advertising, marketing, large events. If you've ever been to a concert or a sporting event, it can push out things to you about, sales and things like that. Human resources, safety alerts, child safety and travel and navigation, among other things. Those are the traditional things that geolocation is used for. It also happens to be pretty pinpoint with latitude and longitude, which is great benefit to law enforcement and prosecution. Again, these are slides that have got basically some of the terms that Google has used in the past. Basically, the process is that you use a search warrant and you try to identify who is in a particular geographic area. So let's go back to our case for a second and step broad. Detective Racy called me and said, listen, we know exactly when Mitchell Jones was killed. We have a 12-minute phone call. We know exactly where he was located. How would you feel about doing a geofence search warrant to say what users were in this predefined, dynamically created geofence area at the time of the commission of the offense to try to identify our suspect, because we had none? And so that was the discussion, is we're going to get a search warrant. We're going to send it off to Google, and we're going to start the process of saying, give us some, even if it's an anonymous data as to people that we believe were in that invisible fence line that we've dynamically created, to see if we can identify, did our suspect happen to have a device within that area at the time of the commission of the crime. And so we did our first geofence search warrant. We sent that search warrant off to Google with an actual a map that was embedded into the search warrant. And we said, hey, we want to know what potential suspects could be in that location. Now, why are you doing a search warrant? Because the Supreme Court of the United States ruled 5-4 in Carpenter versus United States that there is some protection to cell phone location information. So we believe that search warrants are the way to go. You also need to be very careful about having your initial search parameters and saying that basically we want anonymized information because we don't have necessarily probable cause to say that a particular individual was involved. And then after you get that initial information, you kind of back out and expand and move to your more traditional methods. You have about 14 days per Google to follow up with the appropriate legal process to be able to say, okay, can you unanonymize some of this? And then you're going to go back and get the traditional location history as well and begin the data analysis. So cell tower versus Google location history. Your traditional cell tower's got 3 sides, and it gives you just the basic information of, yeah, I believe this handset has signaled off of this tower at this particular time. Similarly, when you have tower dumps, this is more similar to what we have with a geofence warrant. What users were within the area of this tower at the time that we're interested in, presumably the commission of our crime. Now, geofence is a little bit better than that, though, because it actually looks at something called handshakes, which is the idea that your device is looking. So if anyone picks up their cell phone right now and you pick up your Wi-Fi and you pull it up, you're going to have a whole list, you've probably all seen it, of potential Wi-Fi areas that you could connect to. Of course, you'd have to know the passcode and all that kind of stuff. So I know, for example, my neighbor, I'm close enough to my neighbor that their Wi-Fi is going to show up as a potential hookup for me. That information Google's collecting, the fact that your handset is actually looking for and creating a handshake that takes place between the device and the Wi-Fi router, and it occurs really, really quickly. Doesn't have to have an actual connection. It can just be the handshake to say, hey, I'm looking for somewhere to connect to Wi-Fi. I see that you're available to me. Are you a potential match for me? And it doesn't have to have the actual router passcode for that information to occur. And then Google's collecting that information, again, for a lot of the marketing things that we've talked about before. This Wi-Fi has got a very high level of confidence. And when you get this information from Google, it can be very helpful. People started asking when we started doing this presentation a few years ago, what about Androids versus iPhones? It really doesn't matter. Most people use Google, Gmail, anything that's Google related. And if you're doing any of those things, if you've done it in the past, your phone is probably transmitting information to Google, even though you may not know it. So going back to our search warrant, what we did is we basically put this little invisible fence line about our target area. And we said, we want to know what devices were in this target area preceding that 12-minute phone call so that we could try to identify our suspect. This is what the actual search warrant looked like. If anyone wants a copy, please reach out to me and I'm happy to share it. We're all on the same team and I want to help you guys solve crimes as well. After sending that to them, by the way, this is just a description of a bombing that occurred and how it worked. You had a bomb within this geographical fence area in the pink spot. These are all the users that potentially were in the spots. And then by analyzing patterns, you realize, well, there's one user that looks like he traveled from one set of the spot and through it. And then traditional methods showed that that's likely going to be the suspect that was involved with it as well. So in conclusion, after we did this, we basically got a response back from Google. They said there are 4 users within the geographic area you're interested in at the time of the commission of your crime. 3 of those users were quickly eliminated as being neighbors with no suspicion that they were actually involved in the homicide itself. And then 1 user was the complete unknown to us in this relatively cold case. And based on his criminal history at a prior aggravated assault, his age, address, other things like that, we believe that this suspect who was on probation in Atlanta was potentially the person that committed our crime. That led to additional search warrants to check the travel of his phone, and sure enough, it showed that he had traveled with his phone all the way up to the crime scene, and then after the commission of the crime, traveled back down into Atlanta with his traditional cell phone as well. Using some traditional cell phone analysis tools, Cellmark and Trax were the big ones. Eventually, an arrest warrant was obtained for Mr. Dante Holmes. He was brought in. He initially lied and said he didn't know the victim. Of course, he very much pivoted when the cell phone science was shown to him. We also happened to recover from Google a photograph of an injury that he received probably during the stabbing to himself, to his ankle, that he had uploaded to the cloud, and it was the day of the crime. That DNA, his DNA, eventually matched the DNA that I mentioned on the threshold of the crime scene. So he claimed self-defense initially. Here's another video. Hopefully it will play okay, of the conclusion of that case at the eve of trial.
Police tell us new technology helped them solve a murder case that had gone unsolved for months, and now the killer is going to prison for life. A grieving father tells us he hopes that man never gets freedom again. Channel 2's Cobb County Bureau Chief Chris Jose is live in Marietta. That's where the new technology played a very important part. Chris?
And Jovita, the murder of this man right here, Mitchell Jones Jr., went cold for months. That's until Cobb County police investigators used something called geofence technology to track down this man's killer. Today, the lead prosecutor on this case told me this is a warning to other people who commit major crimes in Cobb County.
Well, they need to know that we're coming for them. We don't quit.
Top prosecutor Jesse Evans told me that's the message to other criminals. He believes is one of the first successful uses of geofencing technology in Georgia.
If we can creatively come up with new tools that we can solve crimes and get answers for people, we're absolutely going to go to the ends of the earth to be able to do so.
A judge sentenced Holmes to life in prison on Monday for the murder of Mitchell Jones Jr. Cobb County police say Holmes repeatedly stabbed and robbed Jones Jr. in November 2018. Officers found the 31-year-old at home on Laurie Joe Drive inside a locked bedroom.
I don't think he should ever see the light of day again. I'm sorry, I can't finish my statement.
Mitchell Jones Sr. was too emotional to read a victim impact statement. He spoke to me after Holmes walked away in handcuffs.
I pray that I can forgive him, but there's no weight off my shoulder. I miss my son.
In March 2019, investigators executed their first ever warrant for geofence data from Google and pinpointed which cell phones were in the area when the murder took place. Police quickly eliminated 3 people and used the data from Holmes' accounts and Jones' stolen phone to solve the crime.
The Cobb County detectives, they went night and day until they found him, and then thank God they did.
Blood samples at the murder scene also matched the killer's DNA. Jones Sr. told me his son could light up any room, and he moved here to Georgia from Pennsylvania to start up a better life.
So it's a great technology. It's becoming more challenging to use. Google's not made it easy for us, especially in the wake of some final thoughts on that, particularly some privacy concerns. The ACLU's brought up some things as well. But looking at these technologies, I do have a response to all of these things. For familial DNA, it's not the purpose DNA that we're using. For facial recognition, remember that they're only searching public images. For geofence technology, we're not targeting the perp yet. We're really just targeting a geographic area. And you always have a good standing argument as well that what we're really getting is data from third-party entities. It's not coming from the actual devices itself. And just remember that we owe it to our victims to try to challenge the process, seek opportunities to improve, and to experiment and generate small wins. So I've got another couple of cases, time permitting, that I want to talk about that leverage some cool technology. If Nick O'Connor's on this case, I know that he would say that this is one of his finest hours in terms of his investigation as a cold case investigator. Actually went to this crime scene in July of 2013. This was a house where the deceased victim was shot and killed. There was no forced entry. The house was lived in. She lived there with her young baby child and her mother. She was executed in the kitchen area. Clearly there was there were two gunshots, and she was actually pistol whipped, it looked like. There was a round that actually was fired through a cabinet that passed through a wall and was recovered from another portion of the house by a water heater. Here you can see evidence of Danielle Marshall, the deceased victim. She was crumpled on the floor of the bathroom, and Ava was found crawling around the crime scene. The 911 caller in this case was her abusive boyfriend, who she had separated from. He had created almost the perfect alibi in that he had left his cell phone basically at his now new girlfriend's house, and basically acted like he didn't know that Danielle was asleep or dead, and came down there and called 911, said, "I can't get her to come to the door," is basically what the story was. He was a suspect from the day one. He had multiple cycles of violence with her, and because they had this shared child, there was this connection to them. So I want to give credit to again, Nick O'Connor. We had two shootings related to this. There was another fake mystery shooting that kind of happened in the weeks leading up to this homicide, where the defendant had claimed that somebody had shot at his car. We'd had projectiles that eventually recovered there. He had this protracted custody battle, and then the mom, Gloria Marshall, of Danielle Marshall, she was heavily involved and trying to get her extricated from this very bad situation. Our traditional tools were not working, and this case went cold for years. It's only after Investigator O'Connor took a fresh look at the records, because he was enabled to act, that he basically found the needle in the haystack, which was that the perpetrator, Joshua Gibson, had convinced his friend to take him down to the crime scene without Gibson's cell phone. That creates the false alibi, so that Gibson could kill the deceased victim and then convince the friend to return him back to his house. That's a very high-level, short version of what happened. But ultimately, after a multi-week trial, that's what we were able to present to show that Mr. Gibson had quite sinisterly created and manufactured this false alibi. This photo here is actually at a homicide vigil. That's actually Ava there beside Investigator O'Connor right in front of me. And we're celebrating her mom's life with her, because we went through the efforts, the painstaking efforts, to be able to try to get to a point where we could solve this crime. And so as I conclude with this last case, I just remind you, it's really important to get all the people in your huddle, even if your huddle is the Falcons and they suck and they're terrible. You know, if you do that, they're encouraging things that you can find from a cold case perspective, which is where we're going to close out today with our last several minutes here. I do subscribe to, there's a great podcast out there, Team Never Quit, about the Navy SEALs. And they're always talking about just not giving up on cases. This was the oldest successful prosecution my team and I were involved in, a 1986 double rape, double homicide in Cole Street apartments that were now torn down. The story is here that the mother and daughter were murdered by a perpetrator, and that we're going to move forward. Samantha Brady, age 13, was killed in her home. Her friend came to go find her to go playing and couldn't wake them up. She found them basically nude inside their apartment that had been broken into by our perpetrator in the 80s. He tore off her panties, and it was just really bloody, very, very difficult crime scene. Of course, in the 80s, we weren't doing anything with DNA. In 1987, Kyles was potentially interviewed. He asked for a lawyer, and it wasn't until we found some sex assault kits from the 80s hidden in a vault at the Georgia Bureau of Investigations that we're able to turn around and say, hey, let's put these in CODIS. And our 30-time cycle offender, 30 arrests, was finally extradited to the state of Georgia. And in 2018, he pled guilty to the double homicides and double rape. That was a straight up DNA case. But I did want to leave you with a positive. You know, Paula Zahn and her team reached out to us and said, hey, we'd like to do a piece on this really old cold case. There was a young lady that lived in, a young girl, 33-year-old girl that lived in this crime scene named Brandy. She's featured here in this photo. When Paula Zahn said, we want to do a case, a piece on your cold case unit, and we'll fly you up to New York, I said, well, that's great. Let's make sure we bring the whole team up. So we brought the initial lead detective on the far left facing the screen, the cold case investigator on the far right, and that's Brandy, her first trip on an airplane coming up to Atlanta. And so to encourage the heart, I'll end by saying this: modern day, we were able to finally help to get gravestones on the grave sites of both Samantha and her mom. They didn't have the money to do that back in the day. And so there are definitely positives that can come when you make a commitment to cold case. And I'll just close by saying there's a 100% chance that you can make a difference in people's lives. One of the good ways that you can do that is by making a commitment to some of these leadership things that we've talked about here and some of the challenges that we have. And just know that there are people out there, teams such as ours, that are dedicated to serving justice, seeking justice with honor, compassion, integrity. You just got to be willing to make those big steps, and you got to be willing to make a commitment to leadership. And so with that, we're coming up against the end of our time. I told basically April I thought that might happen. So this is my contact information. I hope you've enjoyed this. You're welcome to any of these slides. Since I was talking so quickly, you're welcome to any of our search warrants as well. And I'll turn it back over to April and say thank you all for attending and paying attention to this webinar.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Jesse, thank you so much for covering this topic. I know this is an area that prosecution teams can learn much more about, particularly in thinking of ways to make their cases stronger. If you have a few moments after this webinar, please fill out the survey. These surveys help us to provide quality trainings for capital and complex homicide prosecution teams such as yourselves. This presentation was recorded, and the video as well as the corresponding materials will be made available publicly on APA's website, YouTube channel, and membership database within 3 to 5 business days. That concludes our webinar today. Thank you so much, everyone. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We will follow up with you and resend the PowerPoint presentation as well. So keep an eye on your email box for that. And with that, that was the end of our webinar. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, April. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.